He's Tyler Jones. I'm Harrison Graham. You are watching College Football Now by Chat Sports. A lot of rumors to dive into on today's show, including in a few minutes, a high-level coach getting fired, joining Jimbo Fisher, which is where we'll start here. The latest on Texas A&M and their coaching search. A lot of names have been linked to A&M's opening. There hasn't been any formal interviews that we know of up to this point, but a lot of buzz, a lot of chatter on what direction the Aggies could go into here, Tyler, after they did move on from Jimbo Fisher. But speaking of which, if you want a deep dive into a long list of candidates that could replace Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, subscribe to the channel. We got you covered. We put out a list of candidates to keep in mind. We'll put out a new list probably in the coming weeks as well as more information comes out. But obviously, SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma, Tyler. A&M looking to get this hire right as the SEC is only going to get that much tougher.
A pivotal hire, and very important for you to watch this video as you'll be one step closer to $77 million.
Exactly. So go ahead and subscribe. Check that out. All right, let's get into the latest from College Station as you just made the point. Clearly they're taking this seriously if they're willing to buy out Jimbo for $77 million. I think I read his entire staff. When you add it all up, it's going to be more like $150 million. So a lot of interesting names being thrown out there. And we got to start with the juicy one, Tyler. Stephen A. Smith says, hire Deion, get him to College Station. And before you laugh, I actually don't think it's the craziest idea. Now, let's get to what Stephen A. had to say first, and then we can react. He said this on Get Up earlier this week. Deion Sanders in the SEC, with that vault that they have available to them hogs that he could recruit. He doesn't have them at Colorado, and he ain't going to get them, although he's gotten a few already. I don't think they'll do it. Texas A&M, prime time, Deion Sanders in the SEC, that needs to happen. And what's interesting here before you dismiss it is Deion has ties in the state of Texas. There's no doubt about it. He was a superstar for the Dallas Cowboys, and look, if there's one thing I think is obvious, whether we know how good of a coach he actually is, he can connect to players. He can convince players to come play for him. He's already doing it at Colorado. Texas A&M, he's going to have even more resources here, Tyler, and it's definitely interesting. Now, I do want to read Deion's response to the A&M buzz because, of course, every coach is being asked, what do you think about A&M? Well, he said, I want to win a game. You think I got time to sit down and think about that kind of stuff? Let's focus on this week. There is no chance Deion has at least not spent 5 minutes with this thought in his mind in the last 72 hours. I know he has.
But what is he supposed to say, though?
Exactly.
So I'll say this much. I think that wherever Deion ends up his next spot, we all expect him to go to Blue Blood next, but it's got to be somebody where he can be the face of the program. A place like Alabama, he could never be bigger than the face of Alabama.
Sure.
A place like Texas A&M, they're looking for an identity. That's where I could see potentially of why he might work there as opposed to some of these other blue bloods in college football.
Would you do it if you're A&M?
No, I would lean more towards the likes of Dan Lanning or Jonathan Smith or some of these others that have actually proven it. Deion, I think, has done a good job, and they've improved a lot, but still has more to go with that Colorado program before getting his next big job.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think he wants to coach Shedeur and Travis Hunter one more year there, so I don't.
And his daughter's playing basketball there, too.
That's a good point. Speaking of Dan Lanning, which Tyler just mentioned, listen, coaches have never lied before. That's just a fact. Dan Lanning dismisses A&M when asked about it, which, again, what's he supposed to say? Here's what he had to say when asked about the A&M rumors. I think I've been really, really clear here since day one. I'm not going anywhere. There's zero chance. Don't put yourself in that hole, Dan. I would be coaching somewhere else. I've got unfinished business here, which I kind of like the last sentence. It's like, dude, you've been there a year and a half. What do you mean about unfinished business? But money talks, Tyler. And if A&M's willing to do what they did with Jimbo, with Dan Lanning, you're telling me there's no chance he would consider jumping back to the SEC where he was at Georgia? I don't think he's going to go. But the zero chance, that's how you paint yourself into a corner if you're Dan Lanning.
Well, when we talk about money talks, too, think about this. The last two head coaches at Oregon, Mario Cristobal and Willie Taggart, all left for other jobs. As
Yep.
we saw Cristobal go to Miami, we saw Taggart go to Florida State. So what's going to be different now? What is Oregon going to do to keep Dan Lanning that they weren't doing previously with their other two coaches here? We know that they have Phil Knight and the Nike money and all that, but it's time for Oregon to put their money where their mouth is. If they want to keep a great coach like Dan Lanning, then they need to pony up the money to do so.
Yeah, and look, they're going to get that Big Ten money coming in. Obviously, it's going to be more than what they were getting in the Pac-12. If I'm Dan Lanning, I'm trying to parlay this into a raise from Oregon. Like, I'm staying there. I'm comfortable there. You're not in a situation where they're going to fire you anytime soon. Whereas at A&M, if you're not winning probably in 3 or 4 years, you're gone. And they just paid $150 million to get rid of Jimbo and his staff, or at least they're willing to pay that. So we'll see how it goes for Dan Lanning. Now, Dabo Swinney, which, by the way, let me just mention this. If A&M hired him, is that not just exactly what they just did with Jimbo?
It's the same thing.
It's like the exact same thing. National title coach, kind of losing his luster at the school he's currently at. We can fix him. We can make it work here. Well, Dabo was asked about the opening, because every coach in America is. Could he jump ship? I will say this, Tyler, from Dabo's standpoint, I don't think it's the worst idea. I said this about Jimbo at the time. If they're really going to offer you that contract, I'd consider doing it, because things were starting to slip at Florida State. Dabo had kind of taken control of the ACC. Well, now Dabo's kind of in the position where Jimbo was when he left, where the ACC doesn't run through Clemson anymore. They're kind of just another program right now. So in the midst of a bad season and a slow decline since winning those national championships, and we've talked about this, Tyler, his reluctance to NIL, the transfer portal, he might consider jumping ship if A&M actually gives him that opportunity.
I think it would be great for Dabo. It would be bad for Texas A&M
100% agree.
To go with a coach that is more behind, backward thinking than any other coach in America with NIL and the portal and everything like that. It would be a huge mistake on A&M's part. But if they offer him the bag, I think he'd be crazy to say no.
Yeah, and especially with the uncertainty about the ACC's future and the security of the SEC, I think if he gets the offer, he takes it. But if I'm with you, if I'm A&M, I'm not going down that road.
I know that Clemson wants out of the ACC. It's not a foregone conclusion that the SEC or the Big Ten's waiting for them either.
Yeah, it's a very good point. All right, speak your mind. Get involved in the comment section. Who should Texas A&M hire as their new head coach? Let Tyler and I know in the comments right now. All right, we continue the conversation in a minute. Could this major head coach get fired? We dive in, but first, we want to talk about our sponsor, Prize Picks, here on today's show, the best daily fantasy sports app out there. And listen, I play fantasy football, and most of my teams stink this year, which is why I've dove it in with both feet into Prize Picks, because I can play fantasy sports on a daily basis now. Because the way Prize Picks works is college football, NFL, college basketball. You can play all the sports, and you just do player entries of 2 to 6 players, and if they will go for more or less than their stat projections, it could be passing yards, rushing yards, projected fantasy points. They have combinations like 2-player ones on a single pick where it's like, well, Caleb Williams and Drake May go for more or less than 500 passing yards, all kinds of stuff. You check it out. I've got a 3-player entry for the NFL this weekend with CeeDee Lamb. He's been red hot. Give me the more than 88.5 receiving yards on him. Calvin Ridley's been struggling recently. He's been phased out of that Jacksonville offense in recent weeks, less than 53.5 receiving yards. I also like the less on Bryce Young passing yards. That Carolina team is just a mess right now. $10 entry to win $50 if this 3-player pick entry hits. You can win up to 25 times your money if you hit on a 6-player entry. Go check out Prize Picks right now. It's prizepicks.com/CLNS. Our code CLNS. Get you a deposit match up to $100. If you put in $10 when you sign up, they'll give you $10. All the way up to $100, they'll match you up to $100. It's prizepicks.com/CLNS. Code CLNS. They also have a reboot policy. If you have football or basketball entries, if a player gets hurt in the first half, they will take that player out of your entry. So if you have a 4-player entry, player gets hurt, turns to a 3-player entry, they still want to give you a chance to win. No other daily fantasy sports app is going to do that. It's Prize Picks. PrizePicks.com/CLNS, code CLNS to get that deposit match. All right, let's talk about Chip Kelly, Tyler. I got to be honest, I did not see this coming. 24/7 Sports, the Bruin Report, reporting to here on Tuesday night, Wednesday if you're watching, that Chip Kelly is expected to get fired. I know they just had a bad loss at home to Arizona State, but they're 6-4. He's had to shuffle their quarterbacks. They were starting 5-star freshman Dante Moore earlier this year. He struggled a bit, so they had to make a change. It's not like this thing is completely unraveled for Chip, and
Right.
they're just going to go in a new direction here. I'm a bit surprised. Let me read this quote or this snippet from the Bruin Report. They're reporting here, and then we'll react. It says UCLA will likely fire Chip Kelly after this weekend, but if the Bruins win against crosstown rival USC, he could remain through the end of the regular season. Oh, great. He gets to coach an extra game. It sounds like he's out. I mean, that's kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, I read an article the other day from the great Bill Plaschke talking about this situation, and basically UCLA fans are upset they were sold a bag of goods of this innovative offense, this great offensive mind that Chip Kelly is, and just really hasn't delivered to expectations. But the truth of the matter is this, that UCLA program, Harry, I know that they're going to the Big Ten and all the excitement about that, playing in the Rose Bowl and all, but the facilities around that program aren't great. The money around that program hasn't been that great either. UCLA is not the easiest place to win.
You watch these games, the Rose Bowl's half filled.
It's 2 hours away from their campus.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, Chip Kelly's done a nice job there. I mean, last year, there were a couple of plays away from being in a Pac-12 championship game, and, like, you're having to start a freshman this year. I know they made a switch recently, but, like, you're going to lose Dante Moore if you fire Chip Kelly. Like, he's going to the portal. You can take that to the bank. So here's the feeling I get with a lot of these programs right now. And you guys weigh in. Should UCLA fire Chip Kelly? Type F for fire, K for keep. I get the sense with a lot of these schools switching conferences, these athletic directors and these alumni bases are like, we feel like if we don't feel 100% about the current guy, we need to make a change before jumping into the Big Ten in this case, which I get that to an extent, but I agree with you. UCLA's not a football blue blood. Like, if I'm UCLA, I'm pretty content with being a consistent bowl team, but then every handful of years maybe competing for a conference title or something like that. I think Chip Kelly can do that for you. The grass is not always greener on the other side. Like, I don't know where UCLA turns to if you fire Chip Kelly.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, has to do with exciting that fan base with the idea of if we make a change, do the fans buy in more with a new reset going into the Big Ten? Because even when they were competing for the Pac-12 last year, attendance was historically bad last year. So what do you guys think? F for fire, K for keep? Let us know.
Let's shift to one more story here that surfaced on Tuesday. Quinn Ewers, it sounds like he's leaning toward returning to Texas next season, which obviously a lot of implications there if he does. We'll talk about Arch Manning, Maalik Murphy as we go. But there has been some conflicting reports, Tyler, about this story. Inside Texas, which is part of the On3 network, they say it's a 90% done deal. Pete Thamel kind of pushed back on that. We'll kind of run through the reporting here, but this is certainly an interesting discussion. Bobby Burton of Inside Texas said Ewers expected to return. Decision may have already been made, he says it's at least 90% right now. Now, Pete Thamel, Tyler, pushed back on that, basically said there's not been a decision. There has been early conversations about a potential return, but, quote, there's a long way to go. Thamel, I know for a fact, has a connection with Quinn Ewers' dad, so I'm guessing that's a potential quote from him there. Thamel also added this: Ewers has been viewed since high school as a 3-and-done. Technically, this is his third year, but remember, Tyler, he enrolled early,
right.
So in some senses, it's really supposed to be his second year of college football. So interesting decisions ahead if you're Quinn Ewers, who obviously missed a couple of games with that shoulder injury, but I think has taken some good steps this year in improving as a college quarterback.
I think he has. The completion percentage went up considerably from where he was at last year, less than 60% this year to 70%. Touchdown-to-interception ratio, much better as well. But even with that said, as far as the timing goes, what if Texas were to go on a run and they get to the college football playoff? Hell, they could even still win the national championship as far as we know. What would Quinn Ewers still have left to prove at that point? if he wins the national championship at Texas, there's no way he wouldn't be a first-round pick.
Yeah, I think like that's kind of the like, okay, if it's at 80, 90% right now, if Texas makes the playoff and he shows out, he could drive his way up into the first round, and then at that point, you probably do go. But if the feedback he's getting right now is he's a day 2 guy, maybe the NFL evaluators are nervous about that shoulder that he's injured 2 years in a row.
And it's a loaded quarterback class.
And that, I think that's part of it too. Like, there's no scenario where he's any higher than the 3rd quarterback in this class. Caleb Williams and Drake May will be the top 2 quarterbacks. The question, Tyler, before we wrap up this episode is, what happens with Maalik Murphy and Arch Manning? Now, my prediction is Murphy's probably gone no matter what. I think he enters the portal regardless of what happens here. Does Arch Manning enter the portal, or does he ride this out as a backup for another season behind Quinn Ewers and then take over the reins in 2025? Obviously, those conversations with Steve Sarkisian would have to take place.
Right, and he went to Texas knowing this was a possibility that Quinn Ewers would come back after this season. But I would also have to think, where does the Manning family get involved? And we know for a fact that Tennessee is going to be looking for a quarterback next year.
Yep.
Ole Miss, he might be better than Jackson Dart. So he's going to have his options for Arch Manning. I would think that he comes back to Texas, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. What do you guys think happens with Quinn Ewers, though? Will he go back to Texas next season? Is he going to return? Type Y for yes, he will. And for no, he's going to the NFL draft. 90% reporting, that feels high to me, but I've thought for a few weeks that he might come back, especially since suffering that injury, so it would not shock me. Y for yes and for no, let us know what you guys think, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're just getting warmed up here on College Football Now. More and more videos and content in the coming weeks and next couple of months as well. Transfer portal coverage once the regular season ends as well. So don't miss out. Tyler, myself, and several others here at Chat Sports will keep you guys in the loop every single week.